I froze the moment I opened my bedroom door. There he was, my father-in-law, Gerald, standing by my dresser, holding my nightgown. His eyes met mine, and he smiled like he belonged there. That was the moment I knew something was very, very wrong. This was my bedroom. My sanctuary. My safe place after losing my husband just 3 weeks ago. "Why are you here?" I whispered, my voice shaking. He didn't answer. He just kept smiling and said, "You remind me of her, so much." That's when I realized he wasn't talking about me. He was talking about his dead wife. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. My feet were glued to the floor, and my heart pounded like a drum in my ears. What was he planning to do with my nightgown? And then he took a step forward, holding it out like an offering. I backed away slowly, trembling, because that was the moment I finally understood. I wasn't safe in my own home. My name is Helen Monroe. I'm 83 years old, and I live alone in a quiet little town in northern Minnesota. I've got snow in my hair, soft hands that used to hold surgical instruments, and a heart that's seen too much loss. I was a doctor once, retired now, from Johns Hopkins. A trauma surgeon. Can you believe that? People used to respect me. I used to fix people. Now, I can't even fix my own broken life. I had one son, Michael. He was my light, my reason. But he died in a car accident 5 years ago. Then came Thomas, my husband. My best friend. He was gentle, sweet, a real Southern gentleman. We were married for 45 years before he died in his sleep 2 months ago. Quiet. Peaceful. Or so I thought. Because after the funeral, my real nightmare began. Thomas's father, Gerald Monroe, showed up at the funeral uninvited. I hadn't seen him in over a decade. He and Thomas had a rocky relationship, always fighting about politics, money, or whatever could start a fire. Gerald was tall and mean-eyed. His silver hair was slicked back like one of those TV villains. He wore a jet black suit, too sharp for mourning, with a red tie that screamed trouble. After the service, he approached me as I stood beside Thomas's casket. "You've got a big house all to yourself now," he said casually, like we were discussing the weather. "You shouldn't be alone." I forced a polite smile. "I have the ladies at church. And my garden." But Gerald didn't smile back. "I'm moving in next week. Just until you're back on your feet." It wasn't a question. I tried to protest, but he walked away before I could get a word out. Just like that. 1 week later, he arrived. No warning. No knock. Just the sound of a pickup truck screeching into my driveway. I watched from the kitchen window as he threw his duffel bag over his shoulder and marched straight to the front door. Did I mention he still had a house of his own in Florida? But no, he insisted my house was better for recovery. I let him stay, only because I didn't have the strength to fight. I was still crying myself to sleep each night. I barely ate. But Gerald didn't grieve. He took over. He picked his bedroom, Thomas's old study. He rearranged the living room furniture for better airflow. He unplugged my TV and replaced it with an old vinyl record player that blasted jazz at 5 a.m. But the worst part? He started watching me. Closely. Too closely. I'd catch him staring when I made tea. Or humming while folding my laundry he insisted on doing. He started calling me by his dead wife's name. Elaine. At first, I corrected him. "I'm Helen, Gerald. Remember?" He'd just chuckle. "Same difference. Same face. Same body. You were always her twin." That was the first time I locked my bedroom door at night. One morning, I came down to find all the pictures of my late husband replaced. Gone were the frames with Thomas's smiling face. In their place, wedding photos of Gerald and Elaine. From the 1960s. In my living room. "Where are my photos?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked up from his oatmeal. They're in the attic. I just thought we should freshen up the house a bit. He took a bite. Don't you think Elaine had a beautiful smile? I didn't answer. I went upstairs and cried. For a while, I tried to convince myself it was just grief. That he missed his wife. That he was just an old, lonely man trying to feel something again. But then I found my perfume bottle, empty, and my favorite nightgown, missing. And once, when I came out of the shower, I saw the door to my room slowly close. He'd been watching. Which brings us back to tonight. He stood there, holding my nightgown, smiling. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Instead, I whispered, "Get out of my room." He didn't move. I said, "Get out." He stepped closer. And then, he dropped the nightgown on my bed, turned, and said something I'll never forget. "You'll be mine now, Elaine. Death took her. But I'm not letting it take you." Then he shut the door behind him, and locked it from the outside. Gerald had locked me inside my own bedroom. Not only that, he dropped my nightgown on the bed and whispered something that still makes my skin crawl. "You'll be mine now, Elaine." Elaine wasn't me. Elaine was his wife, his dead wife. But Gerald, in that moment, truly believed I was her. I stared at the door handle, frozen, praying I was wrong. But when I turned it, click, 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 it wouldn't budge. He had really locked me in. I didn't scream. I didn't bang the door. You see, I'd been a trauma surgeon long enough to know one thing. When you panic, you die. I walked over to the window. I was on the second floor, and my garden sat just below. Thankfully, I never stopped gardening even at 83. I'd left a stack of mulch bags by the fence, right under my window, just high enough to soften a fall. So I opened the window, gritted my teeth, and climbed out in my nightdress. The wind was cold. My hands shook. But I swung one leg over, then the other, and let myself drop. Thud! I hit the mulch pile hard. My hip screamed. I cried out. But I didn't stop. I got up and ran, barefoot, into the night. You know, when people talk about retirement, they imagine quiet mornings, grandchildren visiting, baking pies, and planting tulips. I never imagined I'd be running barefoot in the dark from a man who believed I was his dead wife. And the worst part? He wasn't just some random man. He was family. I loved his son. I'd let this man into my home because he was grieving too. I felt sorry for him. But now I realized, this was never about grief. This was about control. My first thought was to go to my neighbor, Beth, across the street. She was 76, had a hearing problem, and went to bed before 8 p.m. like clockwork. I banged on her door. No answer. So I ran to the next house. Carter and Molly. A young couple, mid-30s. Good folks. They had a toddler and 2 dogs that barked at anything. When I reached their front porch, the motion light clicked on. Before I could even knock, Carter opened the door, eyes wide. "Mrs. Monroe." I must have looked insane. I was barefoot, wearing only my nightdress, and trembling like a leaf. He rushed to grab a blanket. Molly came behind him, holding the baby. I broke down right there on their porch. "He locked me in," I whispered. "Gerald, he thinks I'm Elaine. He's not well." Carter called the sheriff's office immediately. 2 officers showed up within 15 minutes, a man and a woman. But when I explained everything, their faces changed. The female officer leaned toward me gently and said, "Do you have any documented medical concerns about Gerald?" I blinked. What? Has he ever been diagnosed with a mental illness? Dementia? Paranoia? No, I admitted. But that's not the point. He locked me in. The male officer looked uncomfortable. "Do you have proof he locked the door? Any video? Did you try calling 911? "I couldn't," I snapped. "I don't sleep with my phone." He had it. He took it yesterday to clean the screen. They gave each other a look. Without evidence of criminal intent, and without signs of physical harm, there's not much we can do tonight. But we can file a report. Carter, bless him, wasn't having it. Look, he said, come inside, rest here for the night. You are not going back there until we figure this out. That night, I sat on the couch, sipping hot tea, shivering under 2 blankets. Molly handed me her phone. Call your lawyer. And I did. His name was Martin Giles. Late 50s. Smart. Loyal. Handled all of Thomas's estate work. But when I told him Gerald had moved in, there was a long pause on the line. Helen, why didn't you tell me he moved in? I frowned. Why would I? His family. I didn't think it was legal business. Well, it is now. Because 4 days ago, Gerald filed a change of residency form with the county. I sat up. What does that mean? It means he's officially listed as a co-owner of your property. I couldn't breathe. How is that possible? He submitted a power of attorney document, signed by you. I never signed anything. I believe you, Martin said. But it's going to take some digging. If it's forged, it's serious. But right now, Helen, I need you to understand something. What? Legally, he may have more power in that house than you do, until we prove otherwise. That night, I lay awake in Carter and Molly's guest room. I was scared to sleep. Scared he'd somehow find me. And angry at myself. I'd let this man into my life. Into my home. I gave him the benefit of the doubt. I believed he was just grieving. But deep down, I knew something had always been off about Gerald. Even at the funeral, the way he touched my shoulder too long, the way he watched me when I cried. I just didn't want to believe it. The next morning, Carter drove me back to the house, quietly. Gerald's truck wasn't in the driveway. I snuck in through the back door with a spare key I'd hidden in a flower pot years ago. I needed to get something, anything, to prove what Gerald had been doing. And that's when I found it. In his temporary room, formerly Thomas's study, tucked in the bottom drawer of the desk, was a manila envelope. Inside it, photocopies of my signature on property documents. A handwritten journal, addressed to Elaine. Dozens of photos of me, sleeping, gardening, in the bathrobe. I gagged. And then, I heard the front door creak open. Elaine! A voice called softly. I froze. I tried to back toward the closet, but I stepped on a loose floorboard. Creak. The footsteps came faster. Then the door swung open. Gerald stood there, breathing hard, eyes wild. You weren't supposed to see that, he growled. I tried to speak. But nothing came out. He stepped inside, and locked the door behind him again. I had just found a horrifying stash of documents in Gerald's drawer, fake signatures, photos of me sleeping, a journal addressed to his dead wife, and that's when I heard him. Gerald stepped into the room, locked the door behind him, and looked me straight in the eye. You weren't supposed to see that, he said. I backed up quickly, holding the manila envelope like a shield. I'm calling the police, I said, voice trembling. He didn't blink. Then, slowly, he reached into his coat and pulled out a knife. A real one. Shiny. Clean. Straight from my kitchen drawer. You're not leaving me again, Elaine, he whispered. Not this time. My knees nearly gave out. My chest tightened. My hand reached for the nearest thing I could find on the desk. A small ceramic angel figurine. It was heavy, sharp at the wing. I held it behind my back. Gerald, I said carefully, I'm not Elaine. You know that. I'm Helen. You're confused, he said. You always get confused near spring. Remember, you used to wear this same nightgown. He was gone. Mentally, emotionally, gone. I took one small step toward the window. He noticed. Don't, he growled, gripping the knife tighter. And just as he lunged, I threw the figurine. It smashed right into his chest, knocking him backward. I bolted for the door, twisted the lock, and ran. I flew down the stairs, heart racing, legs shaking. I didn't stop to grab a coat or shoes. I just ran, again, barefoot through the front door and into the street. But this time, the neighbors saw me. Beth, bless her soul, was gardening and screamed when she saw Gerald chase after me, knife still in hand. She dropped her shovel and ran toward me, flailing her arms. Gerald stopped. Carter came running too, this time with a baseball bat. Gerald froze. And then, just like that, he dropped the knife. He smiled. And said, "I was just playing." The police arrived minutes later. They took Gerald in, but not in handcuffs. They called it mental health distress and placed him on a 72-hour psychiatric hold. They said things like, "He's an old man, maybe he got confused. You said he hasn't harmed you yet, right?" I wanted to scream. He chased me with a knife. He had pictures of me sleeping. He forged legal documents. But they still wouldn't arrest him. "He'll be evaluated," one officer said. "If he's a danger to himself or others, the doctors will determine the next steps." That night, back at Carter and Molly's house, I sat with a cup of tea, hands trembling. Was I overreacting? Was Gerald just confused? I kept hearing the officer's words in my head. "He's an old man." So was I. But I would never do something like this. I pulled the envelope from my purse and spread the documents on the table. Carter helped me take photos of everything. We sent copies to Martin, my lawyer. Then Carter said something that chilled me. "Helen, you need to prepare yourself. He might come back." And he did. 48 hours later. The hospital said he was calm and not a threat to himself or others. So they let him go. And guess where he went? Straight back to my house. The same house where I hadn't lived since the day I escaped. He changed the locks, put up cameras, and told the neighbors I'd left town for a while. That night, Martin called me. I filed an emergency restraining order. We also started the process to void the forged power of attorney. But Helen, this won't be fast. How long? Weeks, maybe months. Months. I whispered. I'm 83, Martin. I don't have months. I know, he said gently. But we'll fight. And you'll win. But fighting meant waiting. And while I waited, Gerald lived in my home. Slept in my bed. And no one could stop him. What hurt even more? Some of my church friends took his side. "He's grieving," they said. "You're being too harsh." One even told me, "He's an old man, Helen. Let him live out his last days in peace." They didn't know the truth. They didn't see the knife, the photos, the lock on the door. Grief makes people blind. But fear? Fear makes you see everything too clearly. One morning, while sipping tea at Carter's, Molly rushed in holding her phone. "Check the neighborhood Facebook group," she said. There it was. Someone posted security footage from 2 houses away. Gerald, digging in my garden at 3 a.m. He wasn't planting. He wasn't at the wedding. He was burying something. Martin said, "If that's evidence, photos, clothes, more forgeries, we can use it in court." That same night, at 2:15 a.m., the front door rattled. Carter peeked out the window. "It's him," he whispered. "He's outside." I tiptoed to the window. Gerald was standing in the front yard, holding a shovel. He wasn't digging. He was just staring at the house. Then slowly, he smiled and waved. Gerald showed up at 2:15 a.m. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't knocking. He was just standing there in the front yard, smiling, holding a shovel, and waving. I pressed my hand to my mouth, watching him sway gently under the porch light like a man possessed. He didn't speak, didn't move. Just stood there, smiling, shovel in hand, as if he knew we were watching, and he wanted us to see. Then slowly, he placed the shovel on the ground, turned around, and walked back into the dark. Not toward his car. Not toward the sidewalk. Toward my house. Carter turned to me. We're not waiting anymore. At sunrise, while Gerald was hopefully asleep, we grabbed gloves, flashlights, and a crowbar. Carter said he'd seen the exact spot in the neighbor's security footage, beneath my rose bushes by the garden bench. That garden had been my pride. Thomas and I planted those roses together the summer after we retired. Red, white, yellow, bursting with love and memories. Now, that patch of earth felt like it held a secret no one wanted to speak. We dug in silence. The air was thick, heavy. My knees cracked as I knelt beside Carter, pulling roots, brushing away damp soil. And then, thud. His shovel hit something. We paused. He knelt down, used his hands to brush dirt aside, and slowly pulled up. A small, rusted metal box. It looked like an old lunch tin. Had a lock, long broken. Carter pried it open. Inside, stacks of paper. Some yellowed. Others are freshly printed. I reached in with trembling fingers. Inside that box were original documents showing my sole ownership of the house. A birth certificate, but not mine. Dozens of letters from Gerald to Elaine, many marked return to sender. A photo of a young woman who looked exactly like me, but wasn't me. My blood ran cold. Carter held up the birth certificate. Helen, this is for someone named Mildred Elaine Baker. Born in 1941. I gasped. That was my birth year. Wait, I whispered, heart pounding. My maiden name, it was Baker. We brought the contents straight to Martin. When he saw the photo, his eyes narrowed. I think this is Gerald's wife, the real Elaine. Side by side, we compared the photo to one of mine from 1965. Unbelievable. We could have been twins. That's when Martin said something that shook me to my core. What if Gerald's obsession isn't new? What if it started before Thomas ever met you? What do you mean? I mean Gerald may have targeted you, because you looked like his wife. What if that's why he approved of Thomas marrying you? I couldn't speak. Had I been living a life crafted from someone else's obsession? Later that day, Martin called with news. A handwriting analyst confirmed the power of attorney document Gerald submitted was forged. The signature wasn't mine. It was traced from a check I'd written at church 3 years ago. We finally had proof. Martin filed an emergency injunction to have Gerald removed from the property. But the court date wouldn't be until the following Monday. It was Thursday. 3 nights left. Carter installed extra locks and a security camera pointed toward my front porch. That night, I stayed in their guest room again, trying to rest. But at 3 a.m., the alarm on the front door beeped. Carter rushed down. The door was open. No one inside. But the camera, unplugged. We reviewed the backup footage from the cloud, and there it was. Gerald. He didn't break the door. He used a key. That morning, I couldn't stop shaking. I felt dizzy. My chest ached. I couldn't breathe deeply. Molly called the doctor, who said it was an anxiety attack. I hadn't had one in over 40 years. They gave me medication, told me to rest. But how could I rest? Gerald had a key. He knew where I was. And worst of all, he thought I was his wife. Martin uncovered more. He pulled Gerald's record from the hospital after the 48-hour psych hold. Turns out, Gerald lied to the doctors. He told them I was his daughter, not his daughter-in-law. He said I was senile and paranoid, and that I often thought he was attacking me. That's why they released him. They believed him. On Friday morning, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was a voicemail. The voice was Thomas's. "Mom, I've been trying to tell you something about Dad. Something happened when I was a kid. If anything ever happens to me, please, check the black safe in my closet. The code is your birthday. I dropped the phone. Thomas had died in a car accident. But now, I wasn't so sure it was just an accident. I received a voicemail from Thomas, my late husband. His voice, quiet and shaking, said, "Mom, I've been trying to tell you something about Dad. If anything ever happens to me, please, check the black safe in my closet. The code is your birthday." My hands went cold. Because now I had to face the question I had avoided for years. Was my husband's death truly an accident, or something far darker? Carter drove me back to the house, my house, for the first time in weeks. Gerald was gone, thankfully. His truck had disappeared the night before, and the security system we'd installed showed no activity. Still, I clutched a can of pepper spray in one hand, and Martin had arranged for a deputy to stand watch from the road. We crept into the bedroom where Thomas and I had shared over 4 decades of memories. The bed was untouched. Dust covered the old bookshelf. His scent was long gone, but the feeling, that heavy silence, lingered. I pulled the closet door open. There it was, a black safe, just like the voicemail said. I typed in my birthday, the 11th of April 1940. Click. It opened. Inside, I found a sealed envelope with my name, a small USB flash drive, a yellow legal pad full of handwriting, and most haunting of all, a photo of Gerald and Thomas arguing in the driveway. The last day I ever saw them together. I opened the envelope first. Inside was a handwritten letter. "Mom, if you're reading this, I'm probably gone. I never had the courage to say it out loud, but I know you've noticed how off Dad has been. He never treated me like a son, not really. He always called me the mistake. When I was 8, he locked me in the garage overnight, said it was because I spilled his whiskey. It got worse. He started following you around the house, watching you, talking about how much you looked like Mom, his wife, Elaine. He said you were her reincarnation. I think that's why he let me marry you, because you looked like her. But when I told him I wanted to move away with you to Maryland, he threatened to end everything. I started keeping notes. The USB has recordings. I needed proof, in case anyone ever doubted what he was capable of. I love you, Mom. I wish I'd said it more. Thomas. I broke down crying. This man, this monster, had terrorized his own son, all because I looked like his dead wife. Thomas's death had always been labeled a freak accident. Late at night. Rainy road. Head-on collision with a tree. But now, I remembered something. That morning, Thomas had been nervous, distracted, kept checking his phone. He told me he had business with Dad. When I asked what kind of business, he just kissed my forehead and said, "Something that ends tonight." And now I know why. He'd planned to confront Gerald. And hours later, he was dead. Carter helped me play the USB files. There were 3 recordings. In the first, Thomas recorded a call. "Thomas, you can't just pretend Mom came back." "Gerald, you don't understand. Helen is Elaine. You took her from me. I should have never let you marry her." "Thomas, I swear, if you don't stop, I'll tell her everything." "Gerald, if you do, you'll wish you hadn't." In the second recording, Gerald was talking to himself, muttering in a low whisper. "She came back to me. The Lord gave her back. I won't let anyone take her again, not even Thomas." The third was only 10 seconds. Just the sound of a car engine starting. And someone quietly said, "It ends tonight." We took everything, letters, recordings, documents, to Martin. He didn't waste time. This isn't just emotional manipulation anymore. It's criminal evidence. Within hours, a judge signed a protective order and a motion to reclaim full control of my property. And for the first time in weeks, I could breathe. But only for a moment. That evening, I received a package on Carter's porch. No label. Just a plain brown box with my name on it, handwritten. Inside, a burnt photo of Thomas. A single rose. And a card that read, "I lost her once. Not again." I screamed. Carter grabbed the box and called the sheriff. They dusted it for prints. Gerald's were all over it. But he was nowhere to be found. He'd vanished. The news spread quickly, especially after Martin anonymously leaked the recordings to a local reporter who had covered Thomas's accident years ago. Suddenly, all those people who thought I was just being paranoid, they changed their tune. Church ladies brought casseroles. Local veterans came to pray with me. Even the sheriff stopped by personally to assure me they were now watching my house 24/7. But there was one more thing in the safe I hadn't noticed. Behind the documents, taped under the lid, was an old photograph. One I had never seen before. It showed Gerald, standing in front of an old pickup truck. And inside the truck, Elaine, pregnant, smiling. But the photo had something else, too. A date, 1965. And a second man, face scratched out, except for a familiar scar on his chin. A scar Thomas had. A scar Gerald never had. My stomach dropped. I turned to Martin. What if Gerald wasn't Thomas's real father? He stared at the photo and whispered, "Helen, that changes everything." In the safe Thomas left behind, I found a photo that changed everything. It was Gerald, standing by a truck. Elaine sat inside the truck, visibly pregnant. But the man standing next to Gerald had the same scar on his chin that my son Thomas had. And that man's face had been scratched out. What if Gerald was never Thomas's real father? Martin didn't waste time. He ordered a DNA comparison test using hair from an old Thomas keepsake I had, his childhood brush, and samples from Gerald's medical files. We waited 3 days. I barely slept. Barely ate. My stomach twisted every time I thought about it. When Martin called, I already knew what he would say. "Helen, the DNA proves it. Gerald Monroe is not Thomas's biological father." I dropped the phone. 45 years of marriage. A lifetime of lies. I'd married a man whose identity was tied to a false story. I remembered the day I married Thomas. Gerald didn't walk his son down the aisle. Didn't even smile in the pictures. Just stood off to the side, arms crossed. At the time, I thought it was because he didn't like me. But now I wondered. Was it something else? Resentment? Shame? Jealousy? We zoomed in on the photo from the safe. The man next to Elaine had one more clue, a partial dog tag peeking out from under his collar. We enhanced the image, and Martin used some contacts at the VA to trace it. 2 days later, he called me with the name. Joseph Clyde Redding. A Vietnam veteran. Died in a construction accident in 1974. And guess where? Rochester, Minnesota. The same city where Thomas was born. It all made sense now. Elaine had been in love with Joseph. Got pregnant with his child. But for reasons we might never know, she ended up marrying Gerald instead. And Gerald raised Thomas as his own, except he never saw him as a son. Only a reminder of the man who stole his wife, of the life he never had. So he hated Thomas, and obsessed over me, because I looked like Elaine. The court date finally came. Gerald showed up. He looked thinner, unshaven. His eyes had that same wild fog I remembered from the night he locked me in my room. I sat on the other side of the room, flanked by Martin and 2 deputies. The judge read the evidence aloud. Forged documents, security footage, the recordings, the DNA test, and Thomas's letter. Gerald sat in silence. When the judge asked him if he had anything to say, he stood slowly and said, "She's my wife. She came back to me. The Lord sent her. And he took my son because he betrayed me." He paused and smiled. Now it's just us, Elaine. I shivered. The courtroom did too. The judge granted a permanent restraining order, a full restoration of my property rights, and recommended Gerald for involuntary psychiatric commitment. He would be sent to a long-term facility for treatment. But even as the deputies took him away, he turned to me and said, "I'll wait for you, even in the next life." It was over. But not really. The nightmares didn't stop right away. I still double-locked every door, still jumped every time the wind shook a window. But I went home. Carter and Molly helped me replant the rose garden. We burned the old photos, donated Gerald's belongings. I kept Thomas's letter in a glass frame by my bed. And I kept the safe, never locked again. Because secrets grow in silence. And I'll never be silent again. My name is Helen Monroe. I am 83 years old. I am not Elaine. I am a survivor, a mother, a wife to a man who loved me despite his pain, and a woman who stared down the face of obsession and refused to disappear. I thought I'd grow old baking pies, reading the Bible, and dying quietly in my sleep. But life gave me something else. A fight, a voice, and a reason to keep living. 2 weeks after the court ruling, I received a letter. It was postmarked from a rural hospital in Georgia. Inside was a photo. A woman, aged, blonde, kind eyes, holding a baby. The note read, "If you're reading this, we might share more than just a face." My mama's name was Elaine Baker too, and she always told me I had a twin somewhere out there. There was a return address. And a phone number. I looked in the mirror. My hands trembled. Could Elaine have been my sister? 2 weeks after Gerald was institutionalized, I received a letter from a rural hospital in Georgia. Inside was a photo of an older woman who looked exactly like me. Blonde hair, soft eyes, same smile. The note read, "My mama's name was Elaine Baker too, and she always told me I had a twin somewhere out there." I held the letter in shaking hands. Could Elaine, the woman Gerald obsessed over, have been my twin sister? And if so, how had we been separated? I called the number. My voice trembled as it rang. Once, twice. Then a soft, warm southern accent answered. "Hello. This is Grace." I paused. "Grace. My name is Helen Monroe. I believe we might be family." Silence. Then she gasped. "Oh, my lord. You sound just like Mama." We talked for hours. And when she emailed me an old photo of her mother, Elaine Baker, age 21, my heart stopped. That was my face. Grace told me everything her mother had shared before passing. Elaine and Helen Baker were twins, born in 1940 in a small Arkansas town. But during the Korean War, the hospital had an outbreak of measles. Their overwhelmed mother was forced to send one child, just one, north to live with a relative in Minnesota for safety. That child was me, Helen. The twins were supposed to reunite later, but the war, poverty, and tragedy struck. Their mother died of pneumonia. Their father, an alcoholic, never followed up. Elaine was raised in Georgia. Helen was adopted quietly in Minnesota by distant cousins, and the truth was buried. Everything made sense now. Why I never had baby photos. Why my adoption papers were vague. Why I looked like a ghost to Gerald, because I was the mirror image of the woman he lost. Gerald met Elaine in Georgia when she was young. She never told him about her twin. Maybe she didn't even know what happened to me. They married. She got pregnant, with Joseph's child, not Gerald's. Gerald raised that child with bitterness. And when Elaine died young, at 33, he lost the one thing he truly loved. So years later, when his son married me, a woman who looked just like her, his grief warped into obsession. Grace invited me to visit. Carter drove me to Georgia. When I walked into the little clapboard house just outside Savannah, I stood on the porch and took a deep breath. And then she opened the door. "Grace." She looked like a younger version of me. Same grey-streaked blonde hair. Same hands. Same freckles. We stared at each other for a long time. Then she whispered, "Mama always said I'd know you by the eyes." And we hugged. It wasn't just a hug. It was a homecoming. Together, Grace and I pieced together the full picture. Gerald loved Elaine desperately, but she never loved him back the same way. She stayed because she was pregnant and scared. But when Joseph died, she planned to leave. Gerald found out. So he kept her isolated, controlled, much like he did with me. And when she finally died, accident or not, he blamed Thomas. He saw in his son the life Elaine would have had without him. That's why he hated Thomas. That's why he tried to erase Thomas. And that's why he tried to replace Elaine with me. I went to visit Gerald once. He was in a facility, heavily medicated, sitting in a sunroom surrounded by other forgotten old men. He didn't recognize me at first. But then he smiled and whispered, "Elaine, you came back." I didn't correct him. I simply said, "You hurt so many people." He blinked slowly, then muttered, "I was just trying to keep her with me." "I'm not her," I said softly, and I left him there. Back in Minnesota, I returned to my garden, replanted every rose bush, repainted the porch swing Thomas built, hung a wind chime that Grace gave me. The safe still sits in my room, filled now with photos of me and Grace, two old women who found each other in the last chapter of life. Thomas's letter is still by my bed. And sometimes, I played his voice one more time, just to hear him say, "I love you, Mom." My name is Helen Baker Monroe. I'm 83 years old. I survived grief, betrayal, obsession, and I uncovered the truth about my family that was buried for generations. I may have lived most of my life thinking I was alone. But I wasn't. I had a sister. I had a son who tried to protect me. And I had the strength to find my voice when others tried to erase it. That is my story. That is my legacy. And I will not be forgotten. Grace and I now speak every week. We're planning a joint birthday celebration this year. 84. We're going to wear matching pink cardigans, sit under the Georgia sun, and laugh at all the things life tried to hide from us. Because even after hell, there is healing. And even after darkness, there is still light.